Brotherhood, who of course ran as independent candidates because it's still illegal to be a member. But what was really fascinating to me was the immediate results of that. Because of course, as you know, Mubarak and so many of these dictators throughout the region, most of them are allies, have been making this argument for generations. This argument that were it not for their anti-democratic, autocratic policies, then the crazies would take over. We can't let members of the Muslim Brotherhood actually take part in the political process, because if they actually win votes, the first thing that they'll do is turn Egypt into Iran. This notion that the United Nations correctly refers to as a legitimacy of blackmail, because it's blackmail, is something that I think has fooled successive American administrations into just sort of dealing, and not just dealing, but supporting these autocratic regimes. What happened? The exact opposite happened. These 88 members, in the very, very brief time that they were given an opportunity to be part of the political process, proved themselves to be eminently qualified to run a government. They worked across the aisle to work on issues of freedom of speech, of freedom of religion. They proved that far from being a danger to democracy in the region, they were the best hope for democracy in the region. And it was for that reason that Mubarak unleashed his full vengeance upon the members of the Muslim Brotherhood, because they proved him wrong. And that was something that he was not going to put up with. And we've seen the results of that: the repression, the arrests, the canceling of municipal elections. And what happened? A year after Condoleezza Rice showed up to herald this new foreign policy objective of the United States, she showed up in the midst of this repression while democratically elected members of the parliament were lingering in jails, and praised Hosni Mubarak for his democratic reforms, made no mention of the repression, made no mention whatsoever of the canceled elections. And I think at that moment, everyone understood that it was a lie, that it was a cynical ploy, that it wasn't to be the sort of foundation that everybody was hoping for. Now let's fast forward, shall we, to a year ago, and President Obama standing in Cairo. And I think we've all discussed over and over again in panels, and certainly Professor Ramadan mentioned it already, that the one thing that President Obama has done is fundamentally change the narrative in the relations between the United States and Muslims around the world. He's right. Words matter. Rhetoric matters. And that speech and the words that he used to talk about these fundamental issues that divide the United States and populations of many Muslim majority states were truly revolutionary. There's no question about it. But let's not forget that in that 90-minute speech, President Obama said the word democracy once. Once in that 90 minutes. And that one mention of the word received by far the loudest and most sustained applause line in that chamber. Now, obviously, I understand Obama's reluctance. It's hard to sort of sit in the realm of Pharaoh and talk about democracy. But, nevertheless, there was this hope, at least I expressed a hope, that an administration that came to power under this anti-Bush sentiment, and very much the way that Bush did to Clinton, wanted to separate himself as much as possible from anything that reeked of Bush, suddenly recognized that it turns out that Muslims actually are still taking this democracy thing kind of seriously. We in the United States may have moved on, but they have not. Now, here's the sort of fundamental truth that I just kind of want to emphasize, and it's perhaps not the most popular thing to say, is that it turns out that George Bush was right. Political participation does have the power to moderate radical tendencies. Democratic participation away the power, the appeal of extremist ideologies. If you live in a society in which the mosque is the only free space, then you shouldn't be surprised that opposition to the government, first of all, is religious opposition, and second of all, can be very easily ideologized and radicalized. So we have to work for these kinds of societies in which the mosque isn't the only open space. But that requires, and I think this is something that President Obama needs to fundamentally understand, it requires, whether we like it or not, the participation of some of these problematic parties in the region. For instance, these Islamist groups, who we may disagree with their policies, we may disagree with their tactics and their ideology, but too bad. Because they are, without question, the most dynamic political organizations in the region. And if you think that there is the slightest hope for any kind of political development in the Middle East without the participation of these groups, you're not paying attention. So the question is not, should we include these groups, Muslim Brotherhood, Hezbollah, Hamas, in the political discussions of the region? That's not the question. That there is no alternative. The question is, how do we involve them? And that's something that, I hope that we can have a conversation about, not just during this luncheon, but throughout the rest of the conference, because it is the fundamental challenge of the Obama administration. As I say, it's not a question about whether, it's a question about how. If I were to sort of talk very briefly about the difference between the way I think that the Bush administration pursued this issue of democracy promotion and the way that the Obama administration is pursuing it, I would put it very simply like this. Rather than make it impossible for people to vote for these Islamist parties, which was the Bush policy, let's give them a reason not to vote for these Islamist parties. That has to be the Obama policy. Now, it's very short. I mean, he hasn't really done much just yet. The words are good. The actions have to catch up. As a professor, I always like to say that I'm not willing to give President Obama a grade yet, because while I like his thesis statement, I'm going to wait until I see the paper. And I haven't seen the paper yet. But this one thing I think has to be understood, which is that the pursuit of socioeconomic development, I think it's very important that he brought these entrepreneurs from Muslim-majority states to the United States. All of this has to be as part of this larger process, as I say, of trying to give Muslims in that region not just a voice in the political process, but give them an opportunity to actually decide for themselves who it is that they want to lead them. It's tricky. I'm not naive. I know this region very well. I understand the political problems involved in bringing these groups into the fold. But I ask you again, what's the alternative? Do you have a better option? Because if you do, I'm all ears.
Well, I think if we learned anything today, it's that both Tariq Ramadan and Reza Aslan don't mince words in their comments. But I think we really enjoyed their talk. We have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. So whoever is going to speak, there's a microphone in the back. 1 minute each, because we only have 15 minutes with the questions and answers. While you're going to that line, I'd like to thank, I should have started by doing this, but I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the United States Institute of Peace, the Muslim World Initiative at the United States Institute of Peace, and the George Mason University, the Center for Islamic Studies there. Really appreciate it. I especially want to thank the volunteers. They took care of all the logistics today. See you.